You're live.
Oh, I'd like to call this meeting to order. It is the Committee of the Whole meeting of November 9th, 2023, with adoption of the agenda. Somebody could do that. Councillor Cherry and Councillor Orlando have done that. All in favor of that motion. We will move directly on to staff reports. And I believe that would be Director Moore. Take her.
Thank you. And through the chair, I will share my screen and start my presentation. Okay, and can you see my screen?
Yep.
And if I flip to this document, can you still see it?
Yes, it does look a little cut off on the bottom.
Yeah, I'll have to scroll through since we changed it to portrait. I have printed for all of you that are in person the long-term financial plan. So if you want to flip through and follow along with the printed copy, you can do so, or I will be moving the screen as I go through and you can look up at the screen of what page we're on. So whatever preference you have. I did want to highlight that the long-term financial plan document this year has been condensed. We moved it from about 110 pages to around 65 pages. We've re-imaged the whole document. It now aligns with the public engagement guide in terms of the layout and the theme. And I just want to give a big thank you to Sarah Windsor for helping me with that project as it turned out really great. So with that being said, I'll get into the presentation unless there's any preliminary questions.
Don't see any.
Okay, great. I'm just going to move a bar here. So here we have the draft long-term financial plan document being presented to council or the committee today. We often refer to this as the budget. In this presentation, we'll go over the assumptions used to prepare the budget, the three different tax scenarios being presented to the committee, the long-term financial plan in terms of the base and core budget changes, a review of the spending packages and other projects that have already been provided to the Finance Committee, and then next steps, which are the motions in the report in front of you today. So the assumptions that we have in the long-term financial plan, we have a standard 3% inflation rate applied to all operational revenue and expenditures. It's been tough to try and follow where inflation is going to fall for 2024. Back when I was preparing a lot of the details of the budget in the summer, the federal government was predicting a 3% inflation rate going into 2024. I know there's been a lot of volatility around this, so it is hard to predict. However, in this plan, we're looking at a 3% inflation rate into the future until we see otherwise with the federal government. And then we have a standard 5% inflation rate applied to all ongoing annual capital projects to try and account for the higher inflation that we see in the construction industry right now. The Community Works Building Fund, the program is ending in 2024. It was a 10-year program. However, this plan, we are assuming that the program will be renewed for another cycle. This program used to be called the Gas Tax Fund, and it's now switched to Community Works if you don't recognize the name. And the other assumption that we're working with in this financial plan is that the development cost charges bylaw will be updated in 2024. And at any point during this conversation and presentation, if you have any questions, just please feel free to jump in and stop me. Okay, moving on to the next slide. We'll now switch over to the long-term financial plan document, and I'll get you to flip to page 9 to start off with. And I'm going to start the presentation with the scenarios and the recommended taxation before we get into the details this year. Okay, so we're on page 9. I'll just give you all a moment to flip if you're looking at a printed copy. Otherwise, it's here on the screen. Is this large enough for you to see, or should I zoom in a little bit farther?
I think because we have papers in front of us, we can follow.
We're good? Okay, I'll keep going. So in order to calculate the average impact on a home, I pulled stats from BC Assessment. And in 2023, the average single family home was $801,000. I know there's been a debate in the past of what's a reasonable average. I did go straight to their website and get it from there. And to repeat myself, it is a single family home and not just a residential home. And as we go through, we are recommending a 5% taxation increase this year, with scenario 2 and 3 being a 4 and 3% increase. So these are the 3 scenarios this year. They do mirror last year's scenarios, except for this year, I am recommending the 5% instead of the 3% right off the bat. A 5% increase equates to $102 on average in taxation increase, not including utilities. A 4% increase equates to $82 a year, and a 3% equates to $61 a year. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And here we have the utility rates, 4% for garbage, which is $5, and then 5% for the rest of the utilities, which ranges just shy of $30 here in the middle section there. And then sewer frontage, which is a parcel tax, is approximately $14 per property that is required to pay that. And at the bottom of the page, we have the combined impact for utilities and taxation. Keep in mind that these are municipal taxes only. They don't include taxes collected by other authorities. So a 5% increase in taxation plus the utility rate increases above equates to $176 a year. The 4% taxation scenario is an average of a 4.4% increase, or $156 per year. And a 3% increase in taxation averages out to a 3.8% increase with utilities, or $135 a year. And as we move on to the next page, we have residential taxes per 100,000. So this is just a different way of looking at it. So if you have, for every $100,000 of assessed value that you have, this will be the taxation cost per resident. So it is $255 per $100,000 in residential assessed value. And for the commercial business class, it is $1,400 per $100,000 of 2023 assessed value. So hopefully this will help people who don't fall necessarily close to the average calculate what their potential tax cost could be for the following year. And in here, we'll give a breakdown of what makes up the different taxation scenarios. So we have the core budget changes at 2.1%, operating spending initiatives at 0.9%. And then in the 5% scenario, we have 2% being transferred to the Arena Redevelopment Reserve for that project in the future to increase the savings and the reserve levels for that. In the 4% scenario, the only difference is the increase in transfer to Arena Redevelopment Reserve. And in the 3% scenario, the difference is that there is no increased taxation for a transfer to the Arena Redevelopment Reserve. And at the bottom here, we have what does 1% equivalent to. And for property taxes, it is $145,000. So in the recommended scenario, which is scenario 1, we would be transferring $290,000 in addition every year to the Arena Redevelopment Reserve. Does anyone have any questions about the scenarios before I move on to the operating plans?
That's Orlando.
Yes, Your Worship, to the chair. Just a quick question on the additional lift from other categories such as regional districts, I guess hospital, library, utilities. It's not that significant, and I'm looking at the number on so scenario 1, page 9, where it lists the total for an average assessed value at $176. Do you know how much increase for the dollar amount would be for the segments, taxation segments that are not captured in that number? And I imagine it's not like a few dollars or 10 or 15. Do you know?
Through the chair, the biggest impact will be the school tax, and that is set out by the province. Um, that is where the bulk of the other collected taxes come from. In historical years, they have been a little bit on the higher side, like 5, 6, 7%. Um, and in terms of on top of the current school tax that you pay, I don't have an exact dollar value of the impact of school tax per house. But what I can say is with the new construction that we see in the community, it reduces the impact for the rest of the residents. So what these other authorities do is they give the city a letter saying we need X amount of dollars, and then we spread it across all of the properties in the community. And then the new construction basically makes the spread bigger and the increase less significant. And so I am anticipating a larger new construction increase this year coming up with all of the new development being constructed in town. However, unfortunately, I don't have an exact dollar value for you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from anyone? Seeing none, continue.
Okay, great. Great. So now we'll go through the general operating plan fund. So I'll get everyone to flip to page 11 if you're looking at the paper copy. Okay, and at the request of council, I've tried to add more historical information just for reference for everyone. So in here, we just kind of have a graph on our garbage and tax rates. And so you can see the 21, 22, and 23 actual rate increases. For garbage, it was 0%, 8.2%, 4%, and then we're looking at 4% into the future unless we do proceed with the composting project. We may see a lift in 2025 for that. And then for taxation, in 2021, we had a 1% increase, 2022, 4.5%, 23, 5%, and 24, we're recommending 5% again. And then I've updated the longer term plan to 3% to reflect that current inflation rate assumption. Right. I'll move on to page 12 for any of you that are looking at the paper copy. I won't stay long on this page, but I'll just highlight the pie graphs and that about just over half of our revenue is from taxation and a little less than half is from various other grants and service revenues. Okay, moving on to page 13. And this is where we'll get into the details of what makes up that 2.1% for budget change. And I'll just start at the top and go through this page line by line. So in 2023, we had some supplemental assessments for property tax appeals, where our total property taxes that we're anticipating on collecting was reduced by $61,000. There were a couple properties that were intended to have completed their construction and didn't, and so we had to remove the improvements off of their tax notice. We have increased revenue for business licenses due to the new short-term rental fees that were increased. This is estimated at approximately $80,000 in additional revenue. We have increased building permit revenue. This is based off of the fees and charges bylaw update that the first 3 readings are coming to council next week. And we have changed the way we are calculating commercial and industrial permit revenue. I have adjusted the fire rescue and inspection revenue to reflect what we're actually receiving. So we do charge a service fee for inspecting buildings and whatnot and fire inspections for prevention purposes. Does Councillor Cherry have a question? Or is this? No, okay. And then just again, another adjustment for the Fortis franchise fee, we saw that increase. The Parks and Rec revenue, we have increased the revenue as we are transitioning back to pre-pandemic levels. We are seeing that increased revenue increase use of the facilities. So that has definitely helped the budget this year at $177,000. And then I've also included a separate line item. So for the fees and charges bylaw update that's coming forward in November, we did increase a few of the rates above inflation. And so we're going to see an excess of $25,000 in revenue for those above inflation increases. And then I've increased the property tax penalty and interest revenue. So the city collects interest on taxes on arrears based off of current interest rates prescribed by the government. And because these have increased quite significantly over the last year, we have adjusted that budget line item. And moving into the expenditures, the wages and benefits, we're going to see about $221,000 for inflationary purposes. We did see a larger increase in insurance costs this year above inflation. And I think this has been across the board in the insurance industry. A lot of people are seeing increased premiums. We have $110,000 being increased for fire vehicle and equipment charges. The fire fleet cost to replace has increased quite dramatically with equipment inflation increases over the last few years, and specifically their fleet. This last year, we broke out the public works fleet and the fire fleet for tracking purposes, and we noted that we're undercharging for the fire fleet for equipment charges. And we will have to do another additional increase in 2025 as well in order to stay on track so that we're saving enough money in order to replace the fire fleet. Some of them have increased as much as 50%. And then we just have other increases for general supplies and other operational items in the budget at $230,000. So the total increase in expenditures in the operational budget is just over $600,000. So right now we're estimating $200,000 in new construction revenue for 2023. This one is a bit difficult to estimate right now because we don't get the initial roll from BC Assessment until January. There is a possibility that we're looking at more like $300,000, which would result in us having a surplus next year. However, I've kind of looked at averages in the last few years of what we've been seeing in new construction revenue, and I've used that for budgetary purposes, which is about $200,000. And then we've increased all of our transfers to reserves by about $250,000 to try and build them up to pay for those increased inflation to capital projects. And that's what brings us to this $308,000 and equivalent to a 2.1% taxation increase for the base budget. Does anyone have any questions before I move on to the...
Yeah, through the chair, thank you. On the increase, I'll use the fire fleet equipment rate. So there's a 0.8% property tax impact for 110,000. That line item. So what's the total for? So that's an increase for the fire fleet, but is that on a budget item for the all equipment?
Through the chair. So this wouldn't include day-to-day apparatus equipment like the SCBA and some of the smaller capital that they need to purchase. This is specifically their wheeled fleet, so their fire trucks, pickup trucks, and essentially they've increased in cost so much that we've had to increase the vehicle and equipment charges in order to properly fund them into the future. And because their fleet was tracked within the public works fleet for many, many years, it was hard to decipher which pieces of equipment we needed to put more money aside for. And so the fire fleet, when I did the calculation, every year we were only putting about $100,000 aside for their entire fleet into reserves. So this would be the equipment charges less the operating expenses to operate the fleet, fuel, maintenance, insurance, that type of thing. And so only putting aside about $100,000 a year only gets you so much when a fire truck is $1 million. And we have a couple of them. So that's one reason why this has been increased. And to try and answer your question a bit more specifically, this budget line item would be housed in the fire department's operating budget as an increased expense for vehicle and equipment charges.
Okay, and just follow up to that. What's the total in that? What's the total for the fire fleet specific? Do we know what the total is? So this is 110,000 increase. What's the total?
Through the chair, just give me a moment and I'll open it up. I believe their total, sorry, is around 400,000, but let me confirm really quickly here. So last year, their internal equipment charges were $290,000 in the budget. Going into 2024, they have been increased to $400,000. And then we transfer to reserves these charges less any ongoing maintenance and fuel and operating costs. So in 2024, the total equipment charges in their fire department operating budget is $400,000. It's equivalent to about a 38% increase from the 290. And in 2025, next year, I have 465,000 and increasing it again in order to do a phased increase to have the reserve levels where they need to be to replace the fleet.
So through the chair, then thanks for your patience. On that 400,000, a certain portion is for operating throughout the year, plus, and then the remainder is going into reserve for replacement. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that's correct.
And do we know what the annual operation is for out of that 400,000? Do we have that broken out to what the operational is for 2024 or 2023, either one?
Through the chair, can you see my new spreadsheet on the screen?
Yes, it's a little
Small.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's better.
So this is our vehicle and equipment fund. The revenue that corresponds in here is the expense in the fire department. You can see the budget for 2023 is 290,000. And we were only putting aside about 113,000 after 176,000 in expenditures. We've increased the budget to 400,000. And with some inflationary rates for operating expenditures, we're now putting aside $213,000 every year to replace future equipment. And then in 2025, it goes up to $272,000.
Thank you. Perfect.
Are there any other questions? I do not see any, so the floor is yours again, Ms. Moore.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, we'll continue on to the utility operating funds. And so if you're looking at a printed copy, we're on page 14. And so we'll start with the water utility fund. In 2021, the fees and charges bylaw was defeated, so there was a 0% increase. In 2022, we did double the increase to make up for that. And for the most part, the water utility fund has been quite stable at 5% increases. This does not include Big Eddy Water. And the rate for users is $594 per year for residential. We'll move on to page 15, which are the pie graphs for the water operating revenue. And so you can see that most of the revenue is from user fees. This gray bar here is the cost for us to, or sorry, that's revenue. That is other revenue coming in from different sources. I believe this would be service fee revenue aside from the usage of water. And then we have a small amount of revenue from debt servicing costs. This would be the Thomas Brook neighborhood. And then you can see here with expenditures in the second pie graph at the bottom, about 48% is transferred to reserves for future capital projects, and about 49% is for ongoing operating costs. And then we pay about $105,000 a year in debt servicing costs for current debt that we have with the water fund. Okay, moving on to page 16, which is the Big Eddy Water Utility. In 2021, we had a 0% increase. In 2022, we only did a 3% increase. I'm not sure why. And then in 2023, we did the 15% increase in order to catch up on how much we needed to be charging to put aside for reserves. And now we're back to a stable 5% increase in the plan. It's $572 for residential for Big Eddy Water for annual rates. Do note that this is a little bit less than the regular water rates in the city, so they're not quite on par with those, but they are close. And we'll move on to page 17 with the pie graphs. This one looks a little bit different, where only about 61% is from user fees, and then we've got about 38% from the local area service agreement. So that's the new system that went in a few years ago. We collect additional revenue to pay for that debt. And then we've got almost $40,000 being transferred to reserves each year, about half of it going to operating expenses, and then 38% going to debt servicing costs, which is what that 38% revenue is coming in to pay for from the residents. Okay. And moving on to the sewer utility fund, we had the 0% increase in 2021, 30% in 2022, 20% in 2023, and then now we're moving into more stable 5%. We may see increases in the future, depending on DCC bylaw updates and how much new growth we have hooking up to the system. This fund has always been a little bit harder to fund because not everyone in the municipality is on sewer like they are with water. And the current rate for 2024 is $566. And then moving on to page 19, we have the pie graphs where the bulk of the fees are user fees. And then we also have this gray pie, which is the frontage taxes. So even if you're not hooked up to sewer, if you have the pipes running in front of your house, you have to pay frontage taxes, and that's about 18%. And then we have some DCC recoveries for the previous wastewater treatment plant upgrade and the debt that we're paying for that, and some other small amounts of revenue. And in this fund, we have more than half of the revenue coming in being transferred to reserves for future capital projects, and about 40% for current operating expenditures, and about 7% for debt servicing. So this takes me to the end of the utilities operating funds and the plan for them. So if anyone has any questions related to these, I can answer those now, or we can keep moving forward.
Thank you. So to the chair and to council, at the Public Infrastructure Committee, we've had discussions about, as a result of the water restrictions that we had for the first time this past summer, some tools addressing that, and one that's been flagged before with council is metering. So not so much the impact for the 2024 budget, but it's definitely the on future changes to the 5-year, the longer capital plan. You can anticipate recommendations coming from the committee looking at water metering to address that, so that there likely be some budget implications. So it's more just a heads up. We had that discussion last month at the Public Infrastructure Committee, and then today a little bit more. So it's more of a heads up, and it's certainly a discussion that council will have to have more on a sort of strategic level as to where our strategic priorities are. But as we grow and the demand on our water systems increasing, and was capped out essentially this past summer, looking at tools to ensure responsible water usage going into the future to reduce other much bigger costs that are resulting from that. So it's just more of a heads up. It's related to this.
Director Black, any comment on that? Or we want to set this one up?
Thank you, Your Worship, and to council. Staff are aware that this is coming and are aware that this is a priority for the community. And through this action, it then places the onus on staff to start pushing forward with the implementation. And staff is ready to make that.
Wonderful. All right. Any other questions? Councilor Leonard.
Through the chair, just a quick a follow-up question regarding metering. Just at a super high level, is this a phased, district metering, commercial, just implementing at the start? This is not a broad residential rollout.
Yeah, so through the chair, it's basically an opening of the discussion.
Okay.
And I think the discussion that we had today is saying, okay, well, we need a plan. How will this go ahead? And that may be something that is carved out possibly even in 2024, minimal sort of say, well, we have commercial, we have industrial, do we do that first, or what's the complications with the Big Eddy? And because if we just reactively say, okay, we're going to do universal metering, we'll be in a mess. So we need to better understand, and I would expect that it would likely be a phased approach of implementation over some years. But that's the dialogue that we have to have. More dialogue at the council level and better understanding, okay, what are the implications, including budget implications in the future. The problem is right now is it's not reflected in our long-term financial plan at all. And so being one of the last communities to be in water metering, that's basically as a result of this abundance or perceived abundance of water. But now there's a reality that kind of shook us this past summer that, there's restrictions and there's implications. Notwithstanding, we've had pretty substantial water rate increases already. So I think that we need to be looking how we can conserve or more responsibly use our water resource. Where's the best approach for that?
Well, entirely agree, and we will have that conversation, I'm sure, at a later time, but if anybody have any questions about what's on the screen right now, or what we just talked about? I don't see any, so again to you, Ms. Moore.
Thank you, and I'll keep going. Okay, so now we'll get into the departmental services and financial plans, their base budget. So this is what is currently in the budget and does not include any operational spending initiatives. So we'll start off with the council budget, which is pages 22 to 23. Okay, so in the council section, we have the grant and aids and permissive tax exemptions. So we give exemptions to nonprofits and other various clubs in the community, just shy of $500,000 projected for 2024. And then in grant and aid, we have the museum, Street Fest, the Performing Arts Center, the golf club, and then the smaller grant and aid program for the most part, that is Parks and Rec facility use. And so that makes the total in the draft budget in grant and aid paid out to organizations as $196,000. And in here we go to the 5-year financial plan for council's operating department. In this section for departments, you'll see 2021 actuals, 2022 actuals, and then I put the 2023 final budget in there. I didn't feel like when I prepared this back in August, September, that I could get accurate estimates or projections for the rest of the year. And so for a reference point of view, I put the 2023 budget in just so that we do have something to reference for that year. But yeah, I didn't feel like I could get estimates that would be accurate enough for me to feel comfortable putting it in here. So that is what we have for our 3 years of historical reference. So it's just a bit different than the rate increases. You do see the bar graphs kind of go up and down, which you might wonder what it is. We had the increase in council remuneration in 2023. This was based off of the external review. We've changed the way that we're allocating IT software costs. So before it was all put through the IT operational budget, we're now we're flowing it back out to the departments that it relates to. So we've moved things around a little bit in terms of software costs, which is one reason why you kind of see the bars go up and down. Is there were some software costs that were in the council budget that we then moved into the corporate services budget, but it also equates to this increase here in 2023. And then the other thing to note on this page is that the election costs, they fall every 4 years, and so you'll see the gray bar for the revenue associated with it, and then increased cost as well. So in general, into the future, it is your general inflationary increases for this department, aside from the 2026 election year. Okay, moving on to the corporate services departmental budget. I have these org charts in here for a visual, since most of the operating budget is based off of wages. So this is just what makes up the budget for this department. So just keep that in mind while you're looking at these org charts. The corporate services department currently has 10.6 full-time equivalents in the department. And we'll move on to page 25. You'll see that there has been an increase in allocation for the IT software costs. So there is a bit of movement here in the bars related to that. And then we saw increased wages in the 2023 budget due to the new payroll and communications positions. And other than that, we just see the general inflationary increases for this department going into the future. Okay. Moving on to page 26, which is the finance department. We have 6 full-time equivalent in our operational budget. And we'll move to page 27 for the bar graphs. Again, we're seeing increased costs due to the reallocation of the IT technology software costs. And then you'll see these lower bar graphs in 2021 and 2022 due to the Deputy Director of Finance position being vacant for those years. And then, like the previous departments, we're just seeing that general inflationary increase for the next 5 years. Okay. And on to the infrastructure and planning department, which we're moving to page 28. Here in the org chart, we have about 38 full-time equivalent staff. Keep in mind that this is just engineering and public works and not the planning portion. And if we move to page 29, you'll get the bar graphs. And there's a few things happening with this department. It is also quite a large department in terms of operating expenditures. So 2022, we're seeing this spike. There's a few things that cause this, and then it goes back down to the budget for 2023. So one of the big reasons for this spike was the increase in vehicle and equipment charges. Vehicle and equipment increased by about 30% that year, and a large portion of this department is related to road maintenance, snow removal, the boulevards, that type of thing, which all requires a lot of vehicle and equipment usage, and those increase quite a bit. In 2022, we had a larger snow year, which resulted in increased snow removal costs. And then we see the budget come down in 2023. And one of the reasons for this is the elimination of the small capital budget from operations. This is all flowed through the capital plan now and funded from reserves. So we kind of see it go up and then back down, and then we see the general inflationary increase over the next 5 years. Okay. We'll move on to infrastructure and planning, the planning and development services department. We have about 10.5 full-time equivalent. We have restructured a little bit in the last year, and the bylaw compliance 2.5 FTE now report to the building and bylaw services manager. Moving on to page 31. Okay. And so this bar graph, we do have some movement in the historical actuals in the budget as well. So I'll just walk you through some of that because we do kind of see it go down and then back up. The red is the total expenditures. And so in 2022, we eliminated the director position. So there was one less FTE in this department. We increased the license and permit revenue based on the fees and charges bylaws. So we're seeing into the future and historically these increase in revenue. This is also due to an increase in applications coming in. In 2021 and 2022, we saw the second building official position remain vacant. We have filled that position now with the building and bylaw manager. And in the 2023 budget, we added the planning technician position. And so we're seeing the budget kind of go back up to that, the total FTE that they had prior to the director position being absorbed. bylaw has its own paragraph. For the most part, bylaw has stayed fairly consistent. We did see an increase in vehicle and equipment charges due to the vehicles that they require for enforcement purposes. And in 2022, we did have some increased expenditures related to some court scenarios with MTI tickets as an anomaly. Other than that, this department's been fairly stable for the last few years and into the future. Okay, we're currently on page 33. We have the Community Economic Development Department. They have equivalent to 3 full-time staff and 2 contractors in their operational budget. And moving into their bar graphs, theirs you see growing quite significantly from 2021 to 2023. The majority of this is related to the change in MRDT revenue. So during the pandemic, we weren't collecting as much from accommodators due to travel restrictions. So these actuals in 2021 are lower than what they would have been prior to the pandemic. And then in 2022, we start to see it recover. And then in 2023, we're seeing the increase starting May 1st from the 2% to the 3% and expansion to Area B. They have received several other flow-through grants in the last couple of years that have increased their total revenues and expenditures. An example of this is the emergency shelter program. So for the most part, you see everything growing, but it's not necessarily related to their internal staff. It's related to these flow-through grants that they manage. Okay. Moving on to page 35, we have the Parks and Recreation and Cultural Department. They have about 24.6 full-time equivalent, 16 casuals, and 1 contractor. That makes up their wages in their operational budget. And on page 36, we see that for the most part, their expenditures have been fairly normal over the last few years. We do see a decrease in 2021 due to restrictions in the pandemic. And then I will note these gray bars. We are seeing an increase in revenues as we transition back to pre-pandemic levels. Okay, so we have the Fire Rescue Department. They have 11 full-time equivalent positions. They have now moved from 5 to 7 FTE firefighters. 2 more were approved last year. And for the most part, with their bar graph, you see these increases, and this is when I was saying the vehicle and equipment charges hit their operating budget. You see these bar graphs kind of go up in 2024 and up again in 2025. And I'm on page 38 for everyone to reference. Okay, and then we have the RCMP department, and they have 21.5 full-time equivalent positions, and 4 of them are provincially funded. We have an authorized strength, is what they call it, for the total number of RCMP officers that we're authorized to have. And all of their expenditures look fairly stable and normal over the years. You do see this dip in 2022, which is related to a retroactive pay adjustment that was finally reconciled. Oh, I see Councillor Cherry has his hand up.
Councillor Cherry, go ahead.
Thanks. Through the chair, I just want to clarify EBCM, we were told we were getting another 3 provincially funded positions. Is this reflected in the budget? It says 4. I'm just curious if there's 3 more coming or if that's with the 3.
Through the chair, I believe the 3 would be in addition to these 4. However, the provincially funded positions will not hit the city budget. So our budget will be the 14 RCMP officers, the municipal detachment services, the victim services coordinator. So that's kind of what makes up our budget. I would have to touch base with Mr. Dodds on whether or not it's 4 plus 3, or whether or not he's included it in these numbers.
Thanks, I appreciate that. I just saw an opening to ask that question. Thought I'd follow up.
Fair enough.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm not sure if director has finished the presentation, but I have sort of some general comments. Should I do that now or we finish
If
this?
you feel they're time sensitive, otherwise wait until.
Yeah.
Continue on, Ms. Moore. Thank you.
And through the chair, I only have one more page before I'm going to go out for comments and questions. So good timing. And it's the fiscal services page. This is really just our kind of total revenues and transfers to reserves. And you kind of see this in 2023, and I'm on page 41 for reference for everyone. You'll see this increase and spike in 2023, and this is related to the Growing Community Fund. So we received an additional 3.3 million, and then we're transferring to reserves an additional 3.3 million to the Growing Community Fund reserve. So that takes me to the end of the departmental operating plans for the draft budget. So I'll open it up for questions and comments on the operating plans.
All right, to worship. Yeah, so just my thanks for it's easy to follow. So the presentation, I think this will be very user friendly to the public. So thank you for that. Just a general comment on the organizational chart. So it's interesting how the layout of these organizational charts, they're not organizational charts, they're these spatial distributions. And I appreciate that because I think it elevates the importance of everybody in our organization. So I certainly see that. And then I'd like to flag one in particular on page 24. It appears, based on going through there, it appears that our chief administrative officer reports to our corporate officer, which I think is awesome.
Me too.
I've met Ms. Floyd. That seems appropriate.
Thank you. For the public, maybe I should just clarify, that was a tongue-in-cheek comment. I'll ask them.
Are there any other questions or comments before we move on? Councillor Cherry.
Thanks, Your Worship. I feel this is an appropriate time to ask these questions. Through the chair to Director Moore, can you tell me what the financial, get my words here, what the financial impact would be with creating a new position, whether it be under CED or finance for a full-time grant writer?
Through the chair, if you don't mind, in response to Councillor Cherry, this is a ballpark estimate that we're looking at wages and benefits of approximately just over 100,000, which equates to a 0.7% taxation increase for a new position related to grants.
Okay, just as a follow-up, are you aware of any grants that may negate that tax increase at all for if a position was to be created at this time?
Through the chair, we typically don't see grants provide a portion of the funding being dispersed to assist with the wages and additional workload that it takes to administer a grant-funded project. I will say that the resort municipality initiatives, the RMI funds, those do provide a $20,000 administrative portion that we can break out to help pay for the cost to administer the grant. We are currently breaking that $20,000 out and including it to offset our operational costs in the CED department. However, many grants don't have that flexibility. A lot of it is related to the infrastructure, and even to the point where some of them say that wages in general, even if it's our staff doing the construction or monitoring the engineering and wrapping up the project and reviewing it all, are not eligible to be grant funded.
Thanks, Director Moore. When you said it was about $100,000, what about, I can't remember if you said it or not, what does that equate to in taxation increase?
That would equate to a 0.7% taxation increase.
Okay, thank you. Steve, if there's any other questions or anything else?
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Thank you. So just to add to what Director Moore is saying on the grant and to Councillor Cherry's question. So for example, we just recently applied for $500,000 through REDIP to fund and provide some much needed capital injection to RCEC. In that grant application, you're allowed to claim 15% toward wages. So if successful, we can use 75,000 of that $500,000 to go toward assisting in the administration of that $500,000 grant. But the problem is it really doesn't provide any admin support because all the additional money that we would get under this grant would go into the plan, and that costs the city or the subsidiary money, for example, replacing steam pipes and replacing other equipment. So that's just an example of, yes, we can chase a grant, but it doesn't really help offset the enormous admin costs to run RCEC. Even though they give you 75,000, it really goes toward implementing that $425,000 budget, which is all capital injection. So that just gives you an example of how sort of the grants work. And Director Moore's correct. Most grants do not pay for administration.
Follow up, Councillor Cherry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't realize I didn't mute my mic there. Would this be an appropriate time to make a motion, or should I wait until the end of the presentation?
Let's wait until the end of the presentation.
Okay.
If anybody else has any comments on this conversation, well, now's a good time for that, or we can wait until it comes up. All right, seeing nothing else. So, Ms. Moore, the floor is yours once again.
Okay, thank you through the chair. I'll go back to sharing my screen. And can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. And I flipped back to this org chart to look at it. This is just to highlight that the CAO is budgeted in this department. So for clarification.
Good answer to her.
Okay, so now that we've gone through all the departmental operating budgets and the base budget increase, we'll move on to the capital projects. This all mirrors the information that was provided at the Finance Committee meeting, but I will quickly run through and highlight some of the stuff that we've already talked about. And so we'll go to page 44 if you've got a paper copy. Okay, so these are the key general capital and major projects. So this doesn't include utilities. This is a summary of the listing that was provided to the Finance Committee in early October. Some of the larger ones on here are the Stormwater Pearson Road upgrades, the 4th Street Calming project over the next couple of years. I know the zoning bylaw update is an important project, the continuation of the pavement management program. And I've highlighted down here that the climate action plan has been moved forward to 2025 per the Finance Committee's motion. Okay, so we'll move on to page 45. And this is the unfunded capital project list. So these items are not included in the financial plan and not on spending package lists that require further information. So these are not in the plan, but these are anticipated projects that the city will be considering in the future. And the two that I'll highlight is the arena redevelopment or the multiplex facility. And the transportation master plan projects for upgrades to the bridge, 4th Street Bridge, and a second crossing. And these are meant to be partially DCC funded projects and are awaiting the DCC bylaw update to be included. Okay. We'll move on to page 46, which is the capital and major project spending packages. We've got them listed based off of rating out of 42. And we've got the highest priority ones on there as the residential curbside composting and the arena redevelopment next steps. The only two that we are not recommending is the cemetery roads paving. We're going to review the fee structure before doing more upgrades there, and additional lighting for a second ball field to be lit up. We will not invest in that until we've finalized an arena location in case it is in that park. Okay. We'll move on to the water utility capital plan. For the next 5 years, for the most part, we're looking at our annual rehabilitation and replacement capital plan, where we're looking at minimum 1.5 million plus inflation each year. For the most part, this is replacement of pipes. Moving on to page 48, we've got the Big Eddy Water Utility Capital Plan. And in here, there's not a lot since the entire treatment facility has been upgraded recently. It's just planning for some replacement of older pipes from wells to reservoir in 2028. And moving into the sewer utility capital plan, this is on page 49. I will highlight the rehabilitation annual budget. It's similar to the water utility capital plan, increasing by inflation each year. And the wastewater treatment plant is expected completion is in 2025. And if we move to page 50, at the bottom there, we have the DCC capital projects planned over the next 5 years. And the only two currently on the list are the wastewater treatment plant upgrade. We're planning on funding approximately 4 million by DCCs, and the Powerhouse Road lift station, we're planning on funding approximately 400,000 by DCCs. Okay, so now this brings us to our reserves and surpluses and debt. If you want to get into the details of this chart, you can, but I won't read that out to you. I'll stick to the graphs. And so this is on page 52. We have the projected total reserve and surplus levels in the mid 30s and going up 30 million and going up to the high 40 millions or mid 40 millions in the next 5 years. And the general trend is that our reserves are increasing based off of the tax increases that we've imposed and the increased transfers to reserves. These increases in reserve levels will help us fund that unfunded list that we just looked at earlier. Okay. Moving on to page 53, we'll look at the debt. We have our existing debt, and the trend is that it is decreasing in general over the years. We do see this like dark red or this red kind of bar at the top here. That in 2025 and 2026 is an increase in debt due to the wastewater treatment plant of 2.8 million. And in the graph right next to it, we see the annual debt servicing costs, and you see that spike in debt servicing costs due to the new debt coming in 2025, 2026, and then the general reduction in debt servicing costs as we pay down our existing debt. And for the most part, we want to fund projects with existing reserves and borrow externally as little as possible per our policies. The goal is that these smaller projects, smaller capital projects are not being funded with debt so that we can save debt servicing room for larger projects like the arena redevelopment and or multiplex, whichever name you prefer. So that is why the trend in this plan is to pay down the debt so that we can have room in debt servicing costs to pay for a larger project like that. Okay, and so now I'll just get into the appendices for you, and then that will take us to the end of the presentation. So Appendix A, which is page 54. This is the operating spending initiative details that we reviewed at the Finance Committee level. This makes up the 0.9% taxation increase requirement. So it was 2.1% for the base budget, 0.9% for operating spending initiatives, and 2% for the arena redevelopment reserve. There is a small impact to the utility operating for the CRM software pilot project. And I won't go through the rest of the appendices in too much detail, but I want to highlight there is one for, I believe there's one for the vehicle and equipment. Okay, so if you go to page 60, it will be, if you have a paper copy, it will probably be folded. So I'll just give you a moment to flip there. And in relation just to the question that was asked earlier about vehicle and equipment, I'll zoom in a little bit too. Here's where we have the fire department vehicle and equipment, the details of the plan, and then the other departments, which for the most part, it's public works and parks equipment, where you can see the 290,000 in the 2023 budget, the 400,000 in 2024, and 465,000 in 2025. And then if you go to the very bottom, the reserve transfers, you'll see that there are outlined reserve transfers for vehicle and equipment for the fire department separately from the rest of the departments that use vehicle and equipment. And the reason why we don't have more than the 2023 budget as a historical reference is because they were all combined into one. And we have recently broken them out between fire versus everything else for public works and parks. So that's the reason for that. But I just wanted to highlight that that is in here in terms of if you're wanting to dive into this level of detail of information, it is in the appendices, and we've left it more high level in the main part of the document. And then as we get, I'm going to zoom back out here. When we get to Appendix I, which is page 63, this is where we get into the comparative benchmarks. I won't go through these in detail. For the most part, you kind of see Revelstoke sitting in the middle. We've used the same comparator communities as last year, which is Castlegar, Fernie, Golden, Kimberley, Nelson, Salmon Arm, and Tofino, which is based off of population size, tourism, location within the province, that type of thing. I will note, just in case any of you are wondering, you'll see that anything that's asset or debt related says 2021, and I'm not sure why, but the province hasn't released 2022 data yet for other municipalities' assets and liabilities that they have on their financial statements. So these are 2021 numbers, and that's why. It's not a typo. And then I was able to get 2023 relevant user fees and municipal taxes and where we sit with that. And so that is for the most part the end of my presentation. If we have any other questions or comments, and I have on my final slide just the motions that are in the report in front of you today. And so the current motion is that the financial plans, including the proposed spending packages and the highlights within the financial plans, be circulated for public feedback, comment, including increases as follows. So all the increases that we talked about today, and that that these financial plans be presented for public feedback at the public engagement session scheduled for November 29th. And so if the committee feels ready to give this motion, they can give that. And then if council feels ready to give a motion, we'll go straight into a council meeting after that so that we can proceed with going for public engagement and not wait till next Tuesday.
Okay, well, we'll start with any questions, the final bit of this, and see where we go from there. Yes, go ahead, Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, Your Worship. So, general comment. Again, thank you for a very readable outline or presentation. I think it's well done, and it's easy to takes a complex financial things and makes them easy to understand. So thank you for that. Just a note, and that's to council on when we look at where we're going with debt over long term. So I'm referring specifically to page 53, so the long term. So we have this annual debt and servicing costs. And also in reference to the page before of reserves and surplus. So I think what the municipality Revelstoke's been doing is trying to get our debt more managed so that it's on a downward trend, or at least not continue to increase. And I think when we look at the 5-year financial plan, that's prudent. Just on the philosophical side, getting down to a point which is sort of reflected in this longer term plan going down to zero. That I think that's where some of the flaw starts to really show on 15-year plans, because I think those numbers are unrealistic. It's not a criticism of the presentation. It's just when I see what that's going in the future, and the idea that we would have all the cash on hand versus not using debt in the future, it's not necessarily prudent. It's specifically for the last decade when we've had these 2% increases, the Revelstoke has managed to leverage low interest rates for the benefit of the community. So that's just sort of the general comment, but again, it's well laid out. Then a question that I have specifically on the comparisons. So yeah, it's a bit unfortunate we don't have 2022, this is page 63, comparators of the other communities for 2022. It would be nice. The specific question that I have is for Revelstoke, those are also 2021 numbers. They're not 2022 numbers. Okay. And so that's maybe something that I might request outside of this document is knowing what the 2022 numbers, because they're more valid today, although we don't have the comparison, so it's hard to compare, but it gives me a better sense of where we're tracking over time. So, but again, thank you very much. Well presented. I'm certainly in favor of the recommended option that's being presented by the Director of Finance.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Councillor Linda.
Thank you. Question for Director Moore through the chair. Going back to page 46, which is the capital major project spending package summary. My question is related to what is and isn't included on capital projects in general, and this is not the only really point I'm asking is just for information. The smallest project is at $10,000. Through recollection, generally, I think there's often quite a few more capital projects, and I'm wondering if there is like a threshold at which we include them on here, or if there are other ones that are just not included for various other reasons, such as them being mandatory or routine. I'm just seeking a refresher and clarity.
Director Moore, if you have an answer to that.
Through the chair, can you see my screen again?
Yeah.
Okay, great. With the new spending initiatives, we give the entire list to council. I mean, if it's something that's $5,000, maybe we wouldn't put it on here. I think the reason why specifically this hallway design is in here is because it's just the design, which means there would be more required once a design had been finalized, which would be brought back to council as another spending initiative. But for reference, pretty much anything that's probably $20,000 or more in new capital spending initiatives gets brought to council and is prioritized because it's new in nature and being added to the plan. And if we go up to page 44, this is where we have like the key general capital and major projects for the general plan and not the utilities. Obviously this is like a shorter list than what is in the entire plan. And we basically try and pull out anything that is significant in dollar value, or is within council's strategic priorities. So you'll see some of them that are a little bit lower, but it's something that is within strategic priorities of council, or items that we see community requests for. So those are the ones that I typically try and pull out. The ones that I don't necessarily list in this much detail, but are in the plan, and I think this might be a little bit condensed since it was at the finance committee level. I gave much more detail there, are the ongoing, I almost want to call them operating capital projects, but they're like capital upkeep, where it's like building upkeep, or other facility upkeep that is based off of planning documents and what is required. And these are usually all smaller dollar values in nature. So just to give you some context of what goes in this plan in detail versus not. Does that help answer the question?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I do appreciate it. And really it's at the end of what you're talking about there is really ongoing capital upkeep and seeing them reflected in the document. So for example, we have a number of buildings that have, to pick a random example, HVAC equipment that periodically needs to be replaced. And so if that were the case at City Hall or the courthouse or the rec center, we were replacing a piece of equipment that costs HVAC equipment that costs $100,000 or $50,000 or whatever, is how would it actually, and it's not optional, it's not an optional project, we have to do it. At what threshold would that be captured on this document or not captured on this document, is I guess more pointed direction for that. And it's just sort of curiosity, so I can better explain to the public these kinds of things. And also just a bit of a thought that if people don't know we're spending a lot of money on these things, we I might need to take the opportunity, other members of staff or council might need to take the opportunity to inform.
Director Moore?
Absolutely. Through the chair, the list that went to the finance committee was more detailed than the list that's in this document. That list had the threshold of between $100,000 to $200,000, and based off of the nature of the project, would get put into that list. However, you did see projects on there like the climate action plan at $80,000 and other projects. If it's identified as an important project for council or the community, I don't follow that threshold to a T. So some of it is a bit of a judgment call, but if it's general upkeep of a building that we know this roof has needed to be replaced for the last 20 years and we've been planning for it and the estimate is $80,000, I wouldn't include it in that list and would be considered capital upkeep, I guess you could say. However, yeah, the list that went to the finance committee and is public is more detailed than the list in here. I do kind of grapple with how much detail to put in a document before it becomes overwhelming for the average person to understand.
Go ahead, Councillor Leonard.
Yeah, thank you for the show, and thank you for the response. I really do appreciate it. You know, I do want to compliment you on the new format. I've been through, I guess, 16 budget cycles now, paid attention fairly closely to at least 12 or 13 of them. And, I really do like the format. It is a judgment call on what to include there. You can just be snowed under with line items if you include every last little thing, and it becomes a bit of a distraction. I guess the main point I would say is that there is a whole lot more on there that is not included in this document, and if people are interested in finding out, they can refer to past budget documents that we've discussed at previous meetings. They are all linked on the city's meeting agenda website, so they can go see if their specific detail is in there. I have another question. This is also back on capital projects on page 46. Just for clarity, I'm looking at the very first line item, the composting and bear-proof bins project. I just want to, for clarity, I want to ask sort of a two-part question. The first is the total project amount for that is 3.3. Externally funded is 250,000, and I'm wondering how you make the division between externally funded and internally funded. So, for example, we're using Growing Community Fund, Green Reserve, Greening City Reserve, and as part of the internally funded. I mean, some people might think of those as new external funding, and I'm just wondering where the actual division between external and external funding lays, and a confirmation that we are talking about 3.3, not 3.55. This extra amount on the right is not in addition to the total project amount.
Through the chair, can you see my screen again?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So this composting project, the total project cost is 3.3, and of that, 250,000 is externally funded. So the 2.4 million coming from the Growing Community Fund, you could consider this externally funding as we receive the grant from the province. However, they require us to transfer into an internal reserve, which kind of makes it then internally funded from our reserve standpoint. Specifically, this $250,000 in grants, that is the externally funded column there. And these are, every municipality receives grants related to climate action initiatives. And we're receiving about $90,000 for 3 years. And we're taking $250,000 of that and putting it towards this program due to the reduction in greenhouse gases that it provides. So in terms of externally funded, I'm looking at actual grants that are coming from other levels of governments or other organizations like Columbia Basin Trust. However, this growing community fund, the stipulation with the grant that we got from the province was that we put it into our own internal reserve. So that's, if that helps differentiate the two.
Yeah, thank you. If sorry, through the chair, if I could ask one more question, on the same page down to the pump track, the total project amount there is again 750,000, and that's the total, of which 250,000 is externally funded. Regarding the external funding amount, if you look at on the right hand side where it lists funding sources, that adds up to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I believe, and I'm just wondering which part of that is externally funded. Which one of those ones that are, which one or ones of those that are listed are externally funded, or count as external funded?
Through the chair, my apologies, I must be missing something in that, but the two that are externally funded are the RMI funds and 150,000 of other grants.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I believe Councillor Cherry has a question. We'll go to him. He's been very patient.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'm going to skip the pleasantries and just ask some pointed questions in an effort to keep the meeting going a little faster. Through the chair to Director Moore, with upcoming QP contract negotiations, how could that affect this budget, or have you already done some financial planning for that?
So through the chair, I have put for the entire operating budget an inflationary increase of 3%. Depending on what is negotiated with QP, we will have to make adjustments in the next budget cycle to reflect that. So.
Thank you. A follow-up question is, do you have any data from around the province, from other communities, projections and change in taxation this year? Or are we actually ahead of the mark for this year?
At the moment, I do not have a lot of data. I do think we're ahead of where many other municipalities are at this time. But at the moment, I do not have any data of where other municipalities are at. Yeah.
Okay. Another one through the chair. How difficult would it be to change this document and remove the 3% option for a 6 or 7% option? Would that mess up your timelines for taxation increase?
Through the chair, it would not be difficult as long as I got the motions today. I can easily update those pages and provide the taxation impact on the average home. And if we even go back to that page, for example, here, I think that's page 9. I'm going to share my screen again. Share screen. So effectively, you see the 3 scenarios. On the average single family home, a 1% taxation increase is equivalent to about $20 rounded per average home. So 3% is $61, 4% is $82, 5% is $102. So the kind of general rule of thumb is $20 per year per 1%. So if you're wanting to know the impacts before making a motion, that's a general rule of thumb I give you. And it would not be overly difficult to change this tax scenario page prior to going to public engagement. If council gives us the motion today, I'm hoping to push everything out Tuesday, Wednesday next week, which is 2 weeks prior to the November 29th public engagement session. And then engagement period goes all the way to December 10th. So we're looking at almost 4 weeks of engagement period for the public.
Councilor Cherry.
Amazing. I guess. Yeah. Does anybody else have anything they want to add before I start throwing out motions?
Councilor Bauer.
Thank you through the chair. Yeah, so interesting at this stage of the game. I wouldn't personally, I wouldn't want to deviate from where we've been on that 5% recommendation that's out there right now, along with the 4% and 3% scenarios. Having said that, I don't think Councillor Cherry's perspectives on what is the community's tolerance for a higher increase going ahead. So one possibility, if you're dabbling with the idea of tinkering with the document, is perhaps creating, sticking with what we have here, other than an additional scenario, say at 6% or whatever number you think would be appropriate, because that's just a pretty straightforward secondary scenario. And I guess I wouldn't want to start tinkering into the details. So if there is a scenario 4, for example, that was 6 or 7%, then that would give something for the public to look at. Well, if we're putting more money aside for the multiplex, the future multiplex, that may be prudent. So that, I guess that's my comments if they're doing it. So depending on how Councillor Cherry might frame his ideas, I guess it'll be interesting.
Noted. Councillor Orlando.
Your worship, to the chair, a question for Director Moore. Sorry, I was looking at the document and missed some of the statements there, but just for clarity, last year we commenced transfer to reserve for the arena redevelopment project. I don't recall the exact percentage, but I believe in earlier sessions we saw that transfer amount is a rolling amount, so that is ongoing. Is that correct? And I guess my question for clarity is, what is that right now ongoing? What was it last year? What is it this year? And moving forward already, I guess my question is.
Director Moore.
Through the chair, just give me 1 second here. I'm pulling it up. So the transfer to the Arena Redevelopment Reserve in the 2023 budget is approximately $420,000. Each year we do put a standard 5% growth rate on the transfer for inflationary purposes. So regardless of whether we go with option 3 or option 1, 2, or 3, which is 3%, 4%, 5%, it will increase by 5%. And this year, with the proposed 5% increase in the draft plan, the total transfer to reserves on an annual basis each year is $731,000.
Councillor Orlando.
Just to be clear, the transfer this year, $731,000 for arena redevelopment reserve, or just reserves in total?
For the arena redevelopment, that's the one that you're inquiring about, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So 2023 was 420,000. 2024 in the draft plan, which includes a 5% tax increase and in addition within that 2% going to the arena redevelopment reserve, that brings the annual transfer to $731,000.
Okay, I'm sorry, and I'm just gonna have a clarity question. So we had a 420,000. I'm just having trouble getting from 420,000 plus 5% equals 731,000. I don't understand.
Through the chair, I can pull up my screen again, but the current taxation scenario for the 2024 draft budget is 5% increase in taxes, 2.1% for the base budget, 0.9% for operating spending initiatives, and 2% tax increase, which is $290,000 for the arena redevelopment reserve. And I'll just pull that up again for you. Give me a second. Share. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes. What page, sorry, what page is that?
This is on page 10.
Okay.
So 1% and property taxes is equivalent to $145,000. So I should actually say scenario 3. This is a 0% in scenario with a 3% increase. We will not transfer anything additional to the arena redevelopment reserve. So it'll be in the 400,000s. Scenario 2, we'll do a 1% of taxation increase in addition to last year's transfers to the arena redevelopment reserve. So that will be approximately 420 plus the 145 plus inflation. And then the scenario 1, which is being recommended to council today, is a 2% increase for arena redevelopment reserve, which equates to 290,000 in property taxes. Does that help clarify it?
Thank you. Yes, it does. I appreciate it.
I believe I saw that Mayor Sauls had his hand up, if he's still there. He's disappeared from my,
I'm still here, Your Worship. Can you hear me?
I can absolutely, yes.
All right. So Councillor Cherry had suggested a different scenario. My question is directed to Councillor Cherry. Just wondering if your thoughts on a different scenario with 1 or 2% increase over and above the 5%, would those funds be going to the arena plan, or do you have some other thoughts with that percentage increase?
If I can, through the chair, I don't see the 3% being a viable option. I like that it's on there, but you know, I don't see how we're gonna. Well, anything could happen. I think it'd be more prudent when I'm talking to other to have higher increases. You know, when I'm talking to other municipalities, they're all going to be looking much higher than us. I don't think we have enough money in our arena redevelopment fund to actually even make a dent and get started, barely even plan the project, let alone chase other grants. And I will have a motion coming up about another spending initiative as well, just waiting for the right time to put that on before anything else.
Okay, thank you for the answer.
Go ahead, Ms. Moore, and we'll go to Councillor Palmer.
Through the chair, I did want to note that I would prefer if we stick to 3 different scenarios. I feel like 4 might be a little too many for the public to choose from. So I think 3 is a nice number to provide to the public. And if we're looking at going to a higher tax rate scenario option, that we drop the 3% scenario. So whether it's 4, 5, and 6% or something like that is what I would prefer.
Do you have a follow-up, Councillor Cherry, and then we'll go to Councillor Palmer.
Yeah, just looking for clarification. This would be a good time to put a motion on the table.
I'm going to let Councillor Palmer speak first. I think he had something to say.
Yeah.
Then right after that, you do what you like.
Appreciate that. Through the chair to Councillor Cherry. So I have some thoughts based on the discussion here and the comments from the director as well. Specifically, what kind of number do you have in mind? Like 6%, 7%, 20%?
No, I'd be looking 6 or 7. Love to have a discussion about it before making the final motion on that with everybody on council here. And I can give my reasonings why.
So through the chair, what I'm going to suggest, based on your comments and the director's comments, if the 3 scenarios were, the actual numbers are not super important other than the recommendation, I think, at this point, but if it was 3, scenario 1, 7%, scenario 2, 5% as recommended by staff, and 3, so 3, 5, and 7, that, and then it puts the recommended option right now by staff right in the middle, and then we can judge the tolerance for a higher increase as those comments come in. I think it's sort of a prudent idea, but I think that would be fairly simple in is be changing the option, the recommended option, that property taxes 5% increase in 2024, along with 7 and 3% increase scenarios. We'll have the opportunity to have that, after the feedback, to say, well, does that belong at 6% or 6.2% or less than 5%, depending on what the feedback from the community. So I'm more interested in your sort of tolerance of that kind of scenario.
Councilor Jerry, if you have a response, go ahead.
Sorry. I hadn't actually looked at that perspective, but thinking about it on the fly here, I like that. 3, 5, 7. I think it is good, and it does give us the opportunity to change. I do agree with what you're saying. Yeah.
All right, well, there is a motion that does need to be put on the table. What that specific numbers appear in that motion is up to, I suppose, whoever makes the motion. Councilor Jerry.
Thanks, Your Worship. I actually had another motion to put on the table for discussion prior to speaking about what's in front of us. I'd like to make a motion to add a full-time position for a grant writer, and I'll let staff weigh in on where that should be, if it should be under finance or economic development. And if I get a second, then I'd love to talk about it.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that motion for discussion.
It's seconded by Mayor Sauls and is now open for discussion. If anybody has any comments. Councilor Palmer.
Obviously,
Go ahead, Councilor Jerry, go ahead. Present your idea.
thanks. Appreciate it. Through the chair to council, looking at all the different items that are on our budget, I've been able to find grants for most of them. And when bringing them forth to specific staff that I think would be appropriate to chase it, I'm finding that I'm getting the same response from a lot of people that we're at capacity, that if we want to go after this grant, we got to put something else aside. This conversation's been floated through the community for the last 8 or 12 years. I think we're at the point now where staff need to support, not just for the writing of the grants, but the reporting, for chasing them, for finding them out. I see there being a huge net benefit to the community by way of not having to increase taxation in future years if grant money is provided for some of the projects we have coming up. And I think it's time that we were to do this.
Thank you. So through the chair to council, I'm opposed to the motion at this time. Not that the discussion isn't without merit, but at this stage in all our budget discussions, it's the wrong time for tinkering with the budget. There's many things in here I would love to tinker with as well, including the metering, but I think at this phase we need to proceed. Specifically on the whether there's an urgency for a grant writer, I don't think it's there. Our economic development has more than doubled over the last few years, and does a lot of the grant writing and quite effectively. And so I think that the timing right now is wrong. And so on that basis, I'll be opposed to the motion, not that it's without merit.
Duly noted. I will go to Ms. Moore as she has a comment to make, I believe.
Through the chair, I wanted to touch on two things. One about potential change in the scenarios. If we are going like a 3, 5, and a 7% scenario, I would like to see something in the motion for what we are doing with the additional 2%, whether it's being transferred to the Arena Redevelopment Reserve or whatnot, just so that I can push that out in that scenario for public engagement. And then in terms of the grant writing position, we brought this forward at the management meeting just to discuss like what could that look like internally for the city. And the general consensus with the senior leadership team was that every department is still going to have to be very involved in the grant writing of these reports that go forward. Most grant writing requires you to be either very involved of the operations of that department or understand certain technical aspects in order to do a good job writing that grant. So it would not alleviate department heads or department leads from managing that grant and being involved in the grant writing. We would view this as more of a support role. The city has seen more and more and more external funding that we have to report out on. And you can see even just like in that one pie chart, only like just over half of our revenue is related to taxation, where a lot of it is other revenue sources like grants. And so we do really see this position being a support position to other departments. And at the moment, grant reporting and financial reporting for all of these external sources is currently kind of split up between department heads, myself, the deputy director of finance, and accounting technician. So we're all kind of doing a little bit of it to get through. We will hit a threshold at some point where we can't just have multiple people doing a little bit of it. We'll need someone dedicated to that. However, I'm not sure that it's completely needed at this time in terms of a support for financial reporting. To be completely candid, I wouldn't be prepared to hire another position until after the utilities come off the tax notices this spring. That's a big project that we're diving into, and it would be hard to have a new staff member transition into our department. So I wouldn't be ready to bring in another staff member if council wanted to go in this direction until the middle of 2024. So just to kind of give some clarity around how the senior management team feels about it.
Councillor Cherry, and then maybe I'll make a comment if this is.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just to through the chair to Director Moore. With what you said, where you wouldn't have capacity to take on a new staff member until mid-year, would that bring the tax implication down to 3.5% if we were to move forward with that?
Through the chair, it would, except for the caveat is it creates a mandatory 0.35% for next year.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I'll comment on it. I think it's a very solid idea. I think it's definitely something that we as a city could benefit from. I share some of Councillor Palmer's concerns about it being kind of, I don't want to use a word that's incendiary, but it's kind of like shoehorned in at the last minute, if I can, without lacking a better term. I do really like the idea. I've been supportive of it when we had our conversations about it earlier. I feel like it requires a more wholesome conversation among staff about what department that lives in. I think it requires a little more, like, we're on a pretty tight schedule. I think it would be something to look for in the next budget cycle. Especially considering Director Moore's comments on they wouldn't even be ready to hire until mid 2024 at the earliest. So I certainly do support the idea. I just don't know if I support it for this budget cycle. Also, Ms. Floyd can correct me if I'm wrong, but we are sitting at a committee of the whole right now, so I don't even know if we have the authority to make that. We can make a recommendation to council to hire a full-time position, but I think that would be the motion that we would be making, not to actually do it. So it would have to come up for discussion again. So if you'd like to keep the motion, I would maybe suggest making it a recommendation to look into it in the future, but that's just my recommendation. I don't know the policies as well as some.
I think the motion's already on the table.
Sure.
Unless there's a friendly amendment, I don't see it going anywhere. Unless Councillor Ladd would like to weigh in.
So I didn't hear the
He
taste.
asked if you have anything.
No, no comment.
He has no comment. So,
I'll weigh in just one more time if I may. So, Councillor Cherry, at this point in time, I agree with what Ms. Moore is stating. So I won't support it moving forward at this time, but I wanted to be able to revisit this for the next budget view.
Sounds good.
all right, we will call the question since it is on the table. All in favor of this motion? All opposed? I believe that motion is defeated. I'm not an expert on math, but. And then we will, sorry, Councilor Palmer, go ahead.
I'm prepared to make a motion regarding the following motion, that the financial plans, including the proposed spending packages and the highlights within the financial plans, be circulated for the public feedback and comment, including increases as follows. Property taxes, 5% increase in 2024, along with 4 sorry, I just want to make sure I get this right. Property taxes of 3, 5, and 7% in 2024, with any additional taxation revenue generated beyond 3% tax scenario to be set aside for the arena redevelopment. Garbage rates, 4% increase in 2024. Water user rates, 5% increase in 2024. Big Eddy water user rates, 5% increase in 2024. Sewer user rates and sewer frontage charges, 5% increase in 2024. And before that second, I just want to clarify the wording on the bullet of property tax increase to make sure the intention is reflected. So that's my motion. And so specifically on the property taxes of 3, 5, and 7%, but the 5%, the intention behind the motion is the 5% as presented by the director. So that's reflected in the actual numbers. So basically we're recommending the 5%. There's these 2 other options, 3% and 7%. So just for clarity of making sure I have that wording correct. I think I have it there.
Clear, Ms. Floyd?
Yes.
Perfect. Do we have a seconder for that?
Second by Salz.
Seconded by Mayor Salz.
So I'll speak to the motion very briefly. So this is based on the discussion of Councillor Cherry of, is there a tolerance for a higher increase? I think he has some very valid comments regarding the tolerance within communities throughout the province and throughout the country, quite frankly, on higher increases. With the 5% increase, we'll probably be in the lower spectrum of communities in general. So I think testing the tolerance for a higher increase, and then specifically for this 7% increase of the arena. I also agree with Councillor Cherry that if we're going to be serious, that we do need to be putting more money aside for the only part I dislike about it is calling arena. It's really a multiplex, but that aside from that, I think that it has a lot of merit, and I would be very interested in seeing the feedback from the public on those scenarios of 3%, 5%, and 7%. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments. Does anybody else have any comments before we call the question? Councillor Orlando.
Sorry, thank you, through the chair. We had, I'm having some internet problems here as we go. So 3, 5, and 7, all of the utility rates remain the same as the original, and the 4% plus the rest being at 5%. And just for clarity, because I've lost my internet connection here, the original scenario was 5, 4, and 3. Is that correct? 5, 4, and 3, 3, 5, and 7. Yeah. I guess, yeah, at this point, I'm not going to support that motion. I would prefer to stick with what we have. If you recall, last year, I was the one who moved to increase the allocation for the arena, and that is a rolling increase, which includes funds earmarked for this year as well, in addition to the lift that is already contained in there. So at the 5% increase, if I'm correct, that's going to be $731,000 for a dedicated reserve at 5%. We're going through challenging times. We might have challenging times in the future, but economically, there's a lot of pinch hurting people. And I guess my main concern is, yes, we absolutely need to get fund into reserve to get going with this redevelopment project. However, my concern, as I've voiced many times, is this will face a referendum. We'll have significant funding, which I'm going to have a question for staff on in a second. Before we even get to that question of reserve, and my concern is always that our trajectory is not towards, currently is, my feeling is questionable, that it's towards success at referendum as required by provincial legislation. So my question of staff at this point, while we make this consideration, is what is the cost, development soft cost going to be? And I know it's referenced in this document. Before we get to a referendum question, how much are we looking at spending before we get to the public and ask them whether they support this project or not? Yeah.
Does any member of staff have an answer for that? Anybody know that? Oh, go ahead.
I believe it's in the budget. I think the soft costs are identified in the budget for 2024.
Sorry, yeah,
To Director Moore.
Through the chair, I'm not sure if Director Black is in the room, but my understanding is that soft costs range from 8 to 10%. Of that, how much needs to be spent prior to referendum? I'm not entirely sure.
Director Black, do you have a comment on this?
Through your worship, the development of the numbers that Director Moore has put out for the engineering, architecture, all the engineering, is roughly 10% on a project this magnitude. To get to that point, we're, I believe, set aside $150,000 for this year to develop a RFP, go out to the market for consulting teams that are highly experienced in these sort of projects to develop some, may I say, boxes of what costs could be anticipated for the various, to support the various sports that would be included in the facility, so that the community can then understand the cost implications for every item that's been suggested. And that will then help drive the scope of the arena project or the multiplex project at that time. And so in order to get to the engineering and the real construction side of this project, we need to further refine the cost estimates for all these options in order for us to get to a place where we can then go in design. So we're anticipating that an RFP will be going out in the next month or so for that service. We did have a presentation today at the infrastructure committee meeting with that RFP, and I believe we'll come back to that committee and or council in the next month. So we're moving forward with that component of the project.
Mr. Brown?
Just to, I'm going to take a stab at this, Shiana. So on page 46, what we do have funded is 250,000 in the 2024 budget for next steps. It's sort of a vague, sort of open account, if you will. We're dedicating some funds that are funded for 2024 to Director Black's comment. And on the previous page, page 45, what we've identified is that 8 to 10% range that Councillor Black talks about that's unfunded. That could range anywhere from 2 to 7 million. So to answer Councillor Orlando's question, what are we anticipating and spending prior to the actual referendum will depend on how much work is done, but we're already starting to slowly identify what the soft costs will be. But make no mistake, Council, the majority of it is unfunded, as outlined in page 45. Thank you.
Councillor Palmer?
Thank you. Going back to the motion specifically, so the scenario that's on the table right now of 3, 5, and 7 with basically the numbers displaying the 5% tax scenario, as opposed to the what was in the package of 3, 4, and 5, still the 5% being reflected. I'm quite frankly, I'm fine either way because we aren't making a decision on the tax increase. We are going out to the public with scenarios. So I concur with Councillor Cherry. I think this is an important enough question, and I don't think it's contradicting Councillor Orlando's concerns. What is the public's tolerance of a higher tax increase in that extra money going towards this future recreation facility? And I think that is a communication as we go through these scenarios as to what's the public's tolerance. And then when we get that feedback, we may decide at 3% and nothing more in, or we may decide, even if we had the 3, 4, and 5, the public could come and say, we want you to be serious about this commitment. So we could make a decision at that time of going 6, 7%. So that is still totally unknown to me where we'll ultimately land up in a tax increase. So I'm obviously in favor of this scenario, and I think it doesn't contradict that. If it fails and we go back to the original, I'll also support that. Either way, thank you.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with exactly what you just said. This is putting it out for public feedback, which I think is always fine. We could throw whatever numbers we wanted in there. At the end of the day, it is up to the public to decide how much they want to see their taxes increased, balanced by how much we need to spend. So, I mean, I'll support the motion, but I'm going to support it either way. As long as we get something out there and stick to the schedule of actual budgeting, then that's what we're here to do. So, I mean, at the end of the day, the numbers, I agree with what you're saying, but at the end of the day, the numbers are, at this point, reasonably immaterial. Director Moore?
Through the chair, if you are interested in understanding the community's tolerance to a higher tax rate and you are interested in exploring something more than 5%, I would recommend going out to engagement for that higher percentage. You may get the odd person commenting that they're willing to pay more than 5%, but I think if we're wanting to get an understanding of where the community asks, I think it would be better served to give them that scenario and get the feedback from them. So,
Certainly agree. Councillor Cherry?
Mute. It's mute.
It's better that way.
Or mute.
I think he knows. I don't think he's speaking. He can't figure out how to unmute. We'll go back. Well, I guess we can go back to Councillor Cherry. Does anybody else have any comments while we're waiting? Councillor Orlando.
Yeah, to articulate.
I'm back.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Councillor Cherry.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Councillor.
Councilor Orlando wants to talk. I'll just wait a minute.
Sure. Yeah, my concern is, we're going to spend millions of dollars before a referendum. We don't have any indication, any data, any business case to support that we are going to get support at a referendum. So what I'm trying to avoid here is spending $3, $4, $5 million of taxpayer funds and failing. That is my fear. And so we've had a year since I was the person who put the extra tax increases on the floor. I've tried to be pretty clear on this project that I'm trying to be objective, and I'm trying to use my experience in developing recreation capital projects to inform my decision making. And my concern is that we are operating on an assumption that this will pass referendum. In that year, I have not seen, I think, key ingredients emerge, such as we don't have a steering committee put together yet. We have an absence of public advocates or champions of this project. We engaged in, spent, I think, $30,000 on a consultant from Vancouver to come in and got a total of about 150 responses to a handful of questions from the survey. And we also have a lot of questions in the public here. So if we were further along and we had those, what I think are ingredients for success, then I would support earmarking more for the fund. But as it stands, in the 5% scenario, we are already putting $731,000 into reserve for this. And I can't support increasing that more right now at a time when a lot of families are struggling in this economy. And had I seen the ingredients for success emerging in the past year, then I would support more, because I'm always an advocate for putting money into reserve, because you need that money in reserve to attract other levels of funding. But I haven't seen that yet. And so I cannot support this scenario. I will speak to the existing one or support the existing scenarios that Director Morris put forward.
If I may, just in the spirit of debate, I think where you're going to see the willingness to earmark more for the funds is if it were to go out as an option for public engagement and the public were to come back and say, we would like to see 7%, under the impression that 4% of that would go into the arena thing. If we saw that, if that was the public engagement with those proposed scenarios, then that would answer your questions on how much the public wants to put into that. But without putting that option out there, we're not going to see if that is something that the public wants to do. So I think that's because this is just for public engagement. This is not voting on that increase. And I think, you are welcome to vote however you want, obviously, but I think that the vote on whether or not you want to see that increase happens when we vote on the increase more than it happens on the scenarios for public engagement. I think the scenarios for public engagement, it makes sense to put that option out there for them and see if the public wants to see it. And if they don't, they don't. And I would absolutely support exactly what you're saying if I got that feedback from the public saying we do not want 7%, we don't want more money put in for the arena, or we don't want any, in which case I would put my vote towards 3%. But I think until we have that conversation with the public, it's premature to assume one way or the other what they want. And I think like in essence, we agree. I'm not saying vote for 7%, but I'm saying those scenarios make sense to ask the question if the public wants to see it. I'll go to Councillor Cherry as he has his digital hand up.
Thanks, Your Worship. Yeah, to the table, I've been sitting in town watching these for 12 years now, and every year for the last 12 years, we've seen the same thing. 3, 4, 5% tax scenario increases. Almost every time they pick the lowest one. No money transferred to reserves, or not enough to do anything about our aging infrastructure. And as much as Councillor Orlando continues to direct the conversation about an upcoming referendum, which is fine, sounds fine, and that's great. Are we just going to wait till the roof completely caves in and then have no money in the reserves to do anything about it? Or are we actually going to start planning for a future and putting money away now? But again, that's my prerogative with a lot of things in this community. Definitely the arena. So I'm fine myself. I'd like to see the 3, 5, and 7 options presented to the community.
Okay, well, that's what's on the table. So if Councillor Orlando, if you have any final comments, feel free, and then we'll call a question.
Yeah, thank you. Just to respond to comments regarding whether that would be, I guess regarding feedback on the budget, that's both a statistical and a database impossibility. For example, we get a handful of feedbacks. We are not presenting an even question with options for people. So it's very, on average, we'll get a dozen comments or less than that. And so if we get all of a sudden 50 people saying they're supportive of this, that's indicative of somebody mustering and rallying a lobby group for one particular end. So that is not a tool for which you can measure that broad-based question for people simply because they won't ask that. In terms of, I haven't been on council in the past few years, but in terms of taxation rates, transfers to reserve, and focus on infrastructure project, I think those are not accurate statements, all three of those ones. There have been significant increases in taxes. There has been significant transfers to reserves, and there has been significant work, including on upcoming work on the sewer project, on significant water projects. So I would like to keep the conversation facts-based, and that's directed to Councillor Cherry. I'm happy to call the question. I don't think I'll get support for this, but I just want to caution everybody. I am not concerned. I don't have an opinion on this project. I am concerned that we are not on a trajectory as of yet, and I am passing judgment in a sense on what I have seen from people who would consider themselves advocates for this project on what they've achieved in the past year. Okay? I'm really concerned we're going to spend $5 million and we're going to end up with zip because the people are going to turn it down, which was almost the case with the rec center, the pool project. It very nearly failed despite a very big, very vocal door-to-door knocking campaign from advocates for that project. So be careful that when they get this question before them, the public, be careful, on how you assess their support for these kinds of things. On what data are you basing your decisions? On what evidence are you moving forward with this spending? Thank you.
All right, does anybody have any final comments on this before we call a question?
Yeah,
Connor.
hesitating because I don't want to prolong, and I think we need to get to the question, but I think the conversation is a very good conversation. Councillor Orlando, I appreciate your comments, and I do align with some of your concerns on the progress that we're making and how serious are we on moving ahead. Without diving down into that, one of the Councillor Orlando's other comments is about the indicator of the public engagement. Yeah, the public doesn't pay any attention to council deliberating on budgets, quite frankly, until there's a controversial issue. Possibly one advantage of the motion on the table, and could be wrong, but by suggesting a higher increases the possibility of the public actually saying, oh, just a minute, whether that's favorable or not. But yes, I think your points about the those measures are how that, how indicative is that of the feelings of the population, I think are not without merit. Anyway, I think probably calling the question would be a good thing.
All right, I think we will call the question then. All those in favor of the motion on the table? And those opposed? Councillor Orlando is opposed. I'm not sure how this works when there's only this many of us. Did we pass it?
Yep.
We passed it. Good. Wonderful. That's lovely. There's a second motion, I believe, included in this package. If anybody wants to put that on the table.
Just a question for the point of order. Is anyone else having trouble with their internet here?
I am not.
What Wi-Fi are you on right now?
Well, I mean, I don't think I am. I just have the agenda loaded. I have, but the.
You're slow? Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm locked out here.
Is there
No,
a
I'm
second
not.
recommended? Oh, the and that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I'll put that motion on the table. Should have been in the first one. I move that the financial plans, including the operating and capital major project spending packages, be presented for public comment and feedback at the formal public budget consultation session scheduled for November 29th, 2023.
Do we have a seconder for that? I'll second. Oh, hang on, Councillor Cherry will do it. That works for me. Is there any discussion on that motion? I am seeing none, so we'll call the question on that. All in favor? That is unanimous on that, so that passes as well. Wonderful, and I believe that is all the business on this committee of the whole meeting, so I will call for a motion for termination.
Shiana.
Oh, Shiana, there's more.
Through the chair, I just want to confirm that we do have a regular council meeting scheduled after.
Yes, we have directly after this, we will go into a regular, well, 5-minute break, then go into a regular council meeting where we will do much of the same, I'm assuming, but so we will look for a motion for termination. If anybody wants to do that, Councillor Staben herself.
Sauls,
Oh, Mayor has called for it, seconded by Councillor Orlando, and all in favor. Okay, I believe that passes.
It does,
We are terminated and we will take a 5-minute break and go into a regular council meeting.
So anyone online will have to join the special council meeting invite that was sent out for the separate Zoom meeting, please.
Thanks. If you guys don't mind, I'm gonna need 10 minutes. I gotta run to the
Thank you.
washroom. Got a couple copies in me.
Feel you there.